This is the Eye on Potatoes, brought to you by the National Potato Council. The Eye is the place to tune in for conversations with growers and thought leaders on advocacy, production, and all things potatoes. Now, here's your host, Lane Nordlund.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Eye on Potatoes podcast. I'm Lane Nordlund, and of course, a big shout out to our friends at Syngenta for bringing you today's conversation. And today we are in the nation's capital once again. Kam Quarles, CEO of the National Potato Council, joining us. And Kam, I tell you what, it's been a while since you and I were both together. Expo was the last time, but my family welcomed a new baby girl into the world, so I wasn't able to be here at the annual meeting a few months ago. But a lot has been happening since the summit took place. A lot this week is happening. So other than just everything going on this week, how is the potato industry going here as we move through April 2024?
Yeah, we're so excited to have you back, Lane. You had your priorities straight. You missing the Washington Summit would be a big downer for us, but you absolutely welcoming a new baby is a big deal, and we hope all that's going great for you. And I always feel better when you come to town. I feel like the common sense in D.C. just climbs up a few notches when you arrive.
I try my best.
There you go. It's as we're going to talk about, it's been a very active couple of months here, especially things are, as we're getting into springtime, we're really driving towards a number of different deadlines. We're in an election year, so there's D.C. is it's kind of hopping. It feels a little bit different than it has the last 3 years. There's a lot of people back in town.
Yep, definitely. And obviously a lot going on this week. We had a visit from some dignitaries in Japan. Mm-hmm. We had some pressing questions when it comes to the Biden administration's trade agenda. And also we had some late night talk about potatoes and vegetables. But let's jump into that. What for our audience and our listeners, what was the late night talk surrounding potatoes recently?
Well, I was probably more surprised than anybody, but we have been dealing with this issue. You and I have talked about it a great deal. So the Dietary Guidelines Committee has been working on its revisions to what it's going to recommend to Americans for what their diets should look like. One of the first questions they asked was whether or not potatoes should, again, America's most widely produced vegetable, favorite vegetable, whether or not potatoes should continue in the vegetable category or whether they should be shuffled over into the grains category. As you and I have talked about a number of different times, we have a lot of concerns about that. So did members of Congress. And so we had, both in the House and in the Senate, a number of members wrote to Secretary Vilsack and Secretary Becerra, who's the head of the Department of Health and Human Services. They jointly, USDA and HHS jointly do the Dietary Guidelines Committee, wrote to him and said, look, calling America's favorite vegetable something else is not a great idea. Well, that went kind of viral. And to your point, Lane, we really didn't realize how viral it went until Jimmy Fallon started doing a bit about it on The Tonight Show just a couple of weeks ago. And I think that drove home, not just to us, we'd been feeling it for a long time, but kind of to everybody, the comic absurdity of what has been suggested by some of these kind of nutrition activists and other folks who are maybe don't have the best, I'll put it nicely, don't have the best interests of potato growers and maybe some of the local school districts at heart when they're making these interesting suggestions.
Well, let's take a quick look at some of those clips from Jimmy Fallon and NBC Productions.
Some more political news. I read that a group of 14 senators are calling on the USDA to keep the potato classified as a vegetable as opposed to a grain. The potato. Yeah, and it's led to a very interesting conversation in Washington. First Senator Mark Kelly said, personally, I love potatoes. I think they should definitely be classified as a vegetable. That's a good point. And Senator Pete Ricketts said, I agree with Mark. There's nothing better than a perfectly round, peeled potato. Then Congressman Keith Self said, I love potatoes too, especially the really old ones that have been in the basket for a long, long time. And Senator John Fetterman said, amen, Keith, but I like when the potatoes sprout those little weird things on the bottom. Senator Rand Paul said, personally, I like it when they sprout from the top. And finally, Senator Mitch McConnell said, I like them mashed. Sure.
Well, again, it's always great when a national platform or a late night show picks something up, and sometimes, Cam, you might have to go on the defensive with some of the stories. But what was it like for the members and leadership of NPC when it came to seeing this, and just what a advocacy boost that could be with just how ridiculous it truly is, but getting that national platform and being highlighted that way, not just in the ag community, but the national community.
Yeah, I mean, it's great, and I think it's what it shows is, and we've said this over and over, Lane. The fantastic thing about our industry is how they reach into everybody's lives, basically every single day. They're potatoes in one form or another, likely showing up on your breakfast or lunch or dinner plate every single day. We've got production all over the country. And a lot of members of Congress, a lot of fantastic growers who interact with their members of Congress. There's just a lot of affinity for potatoes, and it gives us the ability when we have a big issue like this. And it certainly helped to have kind of an absurd twist on this issue. Certainly helps to raise that, and when you see it going up to one of the most an individual with one of the biggest megaphones probably in the world, it's kind of gratifying that we get our message out. But I mean, we don't, even though it's amusing, it's also pretty serious. Yes. The long-term ramifications of this, if it goes wrong, are they're going to echo for years. So while the certainly the public pressure on this is really important, we also need to sit down with the decision makers and sort through the facts and the research to bolster the public pressure about why a change like this it makes no sense. It takes us backwards.
Well, and obviously it's a great boost to the work that you and your team are doing here in D.C., but maybe an item that hasn't made the Tonight Show is, of course, the work to open more export markets. And I know Japan has been a big priority for the National Potato Council and getting that fresh access open. I know you've made trips over there with our friends at Bryant Christie as well to work on this issue, but we actually had a visit from our friends in Japan here recently.
Mm-hmm. That's right. Just last week, Prime Minister Kishida was here, had a state dinner at the White House, went up and spoke to Congress, and in conjunction with that visit, as we mentioned, there's a lot of members of Congress care a lot about the potato industry. Some are really in key places on committees that oversee trade and agriculture and foreign relations. And so those a number of those members, it was led by Senator Maria Cantwell from Washington State, Senator Jim Risch from Idaho, and then also Chairman Wyden on the Senate Finance Committee. They oversee all the trade issues, and Senator Crapo. They were very active in putting a letter together to not to Secretary Vilsack, to the President of the United States, saying, look, this issue has gone on for so long. We've got to get things moving. And I think just to go back kind of a little bit of past history with folks, this has been a market access request that was first made in the early 90s. It goes back over 30 years. We really ramped things up in the last 5 years and said, look, it had just been stagnant for all of that time. And about 5 years ago, we said, look, the U.S. is negotiating a Japan, theoretically a free trade agreement. We've got an opportunity here to finally move this issue forward. The Japanese were not happy about that. And so they have, in those 5 years, they have just stonewalled the negotiations. As you mentioned, Matt Lance, who's been on the podcast a number of different times, Matt and I traveled over to Tokyo last September. We were there with our technical team as they were working through a bilateral meeting where this was one of the central issues, and effectively, sadly, really didn't come away with much. It was another in kind of a history of these annual reports by the Japanese saying, we're considering your request. It will be another year. We're not doing anything, and we'll see you at the next meeting. And that can literally go on for another 30 years, Lane, if we don't break that loose.
Well, and on that, there's obviously been quite a discussion around the Biden administration's trade policy and agenda. And yesterday, as we were recording this podcast, that was actually one of the big topics at the Senate Finance Committee hearing.
Yeah, that's right. And, again, I mentioned Senator Wyden chairs that committee, Senator Crapo, ranking member. You've got Debbie Stabenow, who's the chairwoman of the Senate Agriculture Committee. You have Senator Michael Bennet from Colorado is on the committee, and you go down the list. There's a lot of voices there who really care about potatoes on Senate Finance. Ambassador Tai, our lead U.S., she's the trade representative for the United States. She was testifying on the president's trade policy, and right out of the gate, in his opening statement, Chairman Wyden said, "What are you going to do about potatoes in Japan?" Ranking Member Crapo followed right up behind him. So what are you going to do about opening up Japan to U.S. fresh potatoes? It's that kind of continual political pressure that, ultimately the Japanese government is not doing this in a vacuum. They are being pushed by a very politically connected domestic industry not to move. Japan currently does not import any fresh table stock potatoes. Obviously, if you have basically a monopoly on your market, you want to maintain your monopoly from a competitive point of view. If I were those producers, that's probably a pretty good spot to be in. But that's not how international trade is supposed to work. And the pressure from these key members of Congress and the administration is what's going to break through that. Ambassador Tai indicated that they are very engaged on the issue. They said it's all the way up to the U.S. ambassador to Japan in Tokyo, Ambassador Emmanuel. So there's a lot of good attention on this subject, but ultimately it goes back to the old line: you can't shake hands with a closed fist. We've got to figure out a way to open Japan's hand and get these negotiations moving again. Like I said, absent that, we will be sitting here. Well, you and I won't be sitting here, but maybe your daughter will be sitting here. She'll be dealing with this 30 years from now. That just doesn't work.
Well, and obviously there's important funding within the Farm Bill for foreign market access and development, and Farm Bill is a big conversation right now. I actually spoke one-on-one yesterday with Chairman Thompson for the House Ag Committee for 20, 30 minutes. We were just discussing, how things are going, and he's saying there's going to be a markup in the House come Memorial Day. I know that gets producers pretty excited to hear about, but then we also have the Senate to go with. So I guess on the Farm Bill end of things, what's an update you have to share with our friends listening today? Yeah,
we're hearing that same thing. I think Chairman Thompson, by the way, he's a huge champion for American agriculture, huge champion for farmers, and for getting a new Farm Bill done. In the absence of getting a new Farm Bill done, you just get a series of extensions, and we've seen that in other policies that the U.S. deals with. The transportation bill, our highway bill, wasn't reauthorized for well over a decade. They just kept doing these little short-term extensions. And that's really terrifying when you think of U.S. agricultural policy. The world is changing so fast, and you have a number of competitors around the world who we're not just competing against the farmers. We're competing against those farmers standing on the shoulders of their own governments through their policies. And if U.S. ag policy doesn't, you mentioned our market access programs, a lot of our trade title. If those things aren't updated to deal with both the current and the future challenges for U.S. agriculture, we're going to be in a really bad state in 5 or 10 years. We're essentially going to be stuck in the past as the world is driving into the future. So we absolutely want to see a reauthorized farm bill. I think Chairman Thompson's been very clear, and he told it to you yesterday, you're going to see a markup before Memorial Day. You mentioned the Senate. We're in an election year. There's a lot of things that we can't control, and I've said this. I'm one of the co-chairs of the Specialty Crop Farm Bill Alliance. So that's all of the specialty crop industry in the United States, and we have these questions come up from time to time. We're dealing with a variety of different things from elections to the Ukraine war and all these global issues, inflation, all these things. We can't control any of that. What we can control is, do we have the right policies in place? Are we going to be ready to go whenever that farm bill train starts to move? And I think that is the way Chairman Thompson is addressing this too. Is he's in charge of the committee. He gets to call when the markup occurs. He wants to make sure the committee has done its business. How the House floor evolves, how the Senate process evolves, what gets to the president's desk. He's not in charge of any of that. He's just going to take the bull by the horns and do what he can that's under his power. So, and I give him a lot of credit for driving towards that.
Yeah. And obviously on the Senate side, Chairman Stabenow is going to retire. And I personally would believe that she wants to see a farm bill passed before she hangs her hat up after serving in the U.S. Senate. Could that be a driver to maybe push for more of that approach to have that bipartisan work and push it through the Senate?
I think absolutely. And it's going to be very hard for, I think, U.S. agriculture broadly and also the specialty crop industry specifically to lose a champion like Chairwoman Stabenow. I mean, she has we provided her with a big award when we were at the Washington Summit, and I told her real clearly, if you roll it back 20 years, we couldn't imagine the resources for the fruit and vegetable industry that would be available to us today. And now, from a competitive point of view, we really depend on those programs. What she has delivered, and a lot of her colleagues, in kind of transforming, opening up the Farm Bill to the specialty crop industry that wasn't represented really, wasn't reflected by the Farm Bill 2 decades ago. It's really remarkable. So hard to see her walking off the stage. I would hope that there is going to be a window that opens here to let her and Ranking Member Bozeman generate a really strong product in the Senate, so that we can match that up with something coming out of the House and get something to the president's desk here. Going into Farm Bill negotiations in potentially having a new administration come in. Nobody knows what the election's going to hold. Maybe changes in the House or the Senate leadership. That's a lot of chaos, and it would be vastly preferable for us to deal with the Farm Bill in 2024 and not 25 or 6 or whatever.
Yep. And Cam, what is it like though when you have a new, especially in the Senate, you have a newly elected official come into office? What is that like in creating a relationship with a newly elected official? But I'm thinking the Senate, because obviously, there's less of them, so it's a little easier than the House. We see a lot of elections in the House, but what is that process like, building these relationships so potato producers have more supporters here in Capitol Hill?
Yeah, you do it. It's always hard to lose the knowledgeable ones, but change is part of our business, and it's the members, and it's also the staff too. You've got some really, really, I know cable news and all the social media and everything, they just want to tell you that Washington D.C. is a place where there's it's a lot of chaos and people don't know what's going on. There are some really, really good people here on Capitol Hill, at the associations, in the administration, folks who want to make a change for the better. Our job when you have new folks come in is to give them the best understanding of the facts on the ground. Our business is incredibly complicated. They're not going to know everything, and it's unreasonable to believe that. Really, what we want to do is get to be in the top of their mind, on the top of their kind of contact sheet. So when an issue comes down in agriculture and specialty crops, obviously for potatoes, they're going to say, you know what, I'm going to check in with the National Potato Council. I'm going to check in with my constituents in whatever state I represent and make sure that this new great idea that's coming from wherever in Congress or wherever in the administration, it really is a great idea. And if it's not, let's figure out how to knock it down, because we're a lot of these public policies can create a tailwind, but when talking about some of these interesting exotic ideas on the dietary guidelines, that wouldn't be a tailwind if those get enacted. That would be like a ball and chain around our ankles. So we certainly it is a long discussion to get to people, to educate those members and build those relationships. Someone like Senator Stabenow has been at it for decades, and it's hard to see them walk off the playing field.
Well, again, it's a lot of work, but that's the goal of the National Potato Council, of course, is to represent their members and make sure that they're as profitable and prosperous out in the countryside as possible. Cam, I know it's a busy day in D.C. I heard there was no votes going on today, so it sounds like everybody's staying an extra day in D.C. is what I was told.
Yeah, it's so that's when the work really begins. So you can actually sit down and have meetings. That might be busier than on a day with votes.
Well, anything else you just like to share with our friends before I let you get back to the Hill?
I want to share with our friends that from the National Potato Council, congratulations to the Nordlund family. We are so happy with your new little baby who showed up here a couple of months ago. So that's fantastic, and you got to get her to the expo.
Oh, we will. I'm outnumbered now. 3 girls or 2 daughters and a wife. So.
Oh, there, yeah, you're
a girl dad though. You get it.
You're in zone defense. Yeah, you're going into prevent.
Well, again, Cam, we thank you for those words, and again, thank you to our friends at Syngenta for helping us bring the Eye on Potato podcast to all of you here today. So, Cam, have a great day on the Hill.
Thank you, Lane. Good to see you.
Nice to see you too. Again, friends, thanks for joining us here today. A big shout out to our friends at Syngenta for bringing you this Eye on Potatoes podcast. I'm Lane Nordlund. We'll catch you next time.
Thanks for tuning in to the National Potato Council's Eye on Potatoes podcast with host Lane Nordlund. For more information, visit nationalpotatocouncil.org and make sure to subscribe to the podcast today.